Today we come together from around the world to bid farewell to Professor Maarten de Wit, Chair of Earth Stewardship Science at Nelson Mandela University. His sudden passing has left us bereft, as his colleagues, his fellow intellectuals, his friends, his students, past and present, his collaborators, the communities with whom he engaged, and the many, many people whose life paths were lucky enough to intersect. Today we come together from around the world. I reach out to his beloved ones, his life partner Lynn, Chair of Earth Stewardship his son George, his daughter Thandi Kondwana, her husband has left us bereft, and the newest member of the family, his fellow intellectuals. We share in your loss and the enormous past and unfillable void. His collaborators, the communities with whom he engaged, and the many, many people. Professor Maarten de Wit, a distinguished scholar of conscience, worked tirelessly, always in partnership with so many people. His life such a breadth of institutions, touched so many lives. His daughter Thandi. I am known to urge colleagues and friends to be perpetually restless in our shared search for a better and a more just world. And this was the very essence of Maarten. Always seeking, always searching and researching, always questioning, always imagining new ways to explore and discover, always restless in his quest to go deeper and to find out more, and always basing this on thorough and deep research. Through his scientific work, he taught us both the insignificance and fleetingness of a human being in the bigger scheme of things on the one hand, and the importance of stewardship of the earth as an inheritance for generations that will come after us on the other. Our university and its scholarly project, as well as our reputation, was immediately expanded through our association with Maarten's significant body of work. His scholarship speaks cogently to the everlasting and sustained presence of his honest, engaged, challenging, and restless scholarship among us, so that we keep on learning and discovering, knowing fully well that he lived as he wished, and that we should as well. Maarten was generous almost to a fault in encouraging his students and colleagues. He was rigorous and insisted on each student giving the very best that they could offer, digging deep into themselves in this quest. He was an engaging and challenging colleague, speaking his truth and always welcoming debate and the contestation of ideas. His participation and collaboration within the university knew no boundaries. And I know this was true of his international partnerships too. To his core, he believed in transdisciplinarity. He sought this out, he built it, he practiced it, and he invited and encouraged others on this journey. His basis for transdisciplinarity was the depth of his own discipline and expertise, based on geology and on Earth Stewardship Science. He deeply respected the base disciplines of others as the essence of new discoveries through transdisciplinary approaches. Maarten impacted in ways that he himself was too humble to acknowledge to the aims of Nelson Mandela University to be a values-driven, engaged and people-centered public higher education institution that is in service to society. He was energetic in his intellectual contributions to the university's intention to be a dynamic African university. He generated cutting-edge knowledge for an interconnected global future. He stood in class and taught students about the earth and its deep core secrets and powers. He inspired students and colleagues alike to seek the truth in as yet unimaginable ways through research, and still more research. He published widely, he traveled extensively to build networks of collaboration and set up opportunities for students to learn from the best minds in the world, always in solidarity with the African continent. He experimented with new forms and modes of thought and new practices of producing, framing, and distributing knowledge and its relationship to society. He was indefatigable and a constant source of agitation and inspiration. He taught us all so much. To Maarten's family, I don't, neither do I pretend to understand the depth of your sudden loss. But I trust that this will get better with time as you celebrate his commanding legacy that showed all of us that moving between margin and center is possible and it is doable. As we come together today in our sadness, I trust that we will take strength from each other. I know that Maarten's stories and memories live in the minds of each of us through our rich shared experiences with our colleague and friend. I salute the indomitable spirit of Professor Maarten de Wit, who by the sheer force of his intellect, his science, and his love for humanity, he indeed changed the world. I thank you.
Greetings, my name is Mary Duca. I'm the Acting Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, and I'm honoured to have been asked to pay tribute to Professor Maarten de Wit. He was a mentor, colleague and friend to our students and our staff. In preparing to talk to you, I reflected back on the long connection that the Department of Visual Arts, my home department, has enjoyed with Maarten. Shortly after his move to Mandela in mid-2011, he arrived unannounced at my office, wearing his check shirt and his signature sandals, and with his grey hair standing awry, he introduced himself, not as a name-brand scientist, which I later realized he was, but as a new colleague from the natural sciences with a burning curiosity to see what we were up to and a passionate interest in making transdisciplinary connections with the arts. I called my colleagues to meet him, and we talked about art and science, about the commonalities and the differences between the disciplines, about the silos in which we all bunker down. Maarten spoke with passion about his vision for an Earth stewardship where everyone, regardless of their discipline, would be an active co-contributor, setting out to address the challenges that the world faces. He painted vivid word pictures of a shared commons with active citizen scientists, students from the different disciplinary paradigms, people from all walks of life, connecting and engaging and building new knowledge and understanding. Rare soul that he was, he understood with both his head and his heart that visual art students don't create art in a vacuum. He understood that art is made in response to the socio-political world in which we find ourselves. He spoke passionately about the role that young people, including our postgraduate studies, could and should play in changing the world. He invited our students to come on board and to contribute to the body of knowledge that would advance and support the AEON agenda, and he kept his word. Since that day, almost 9 years ago, Numbers of our students became part of his commons. Not all of them held the course, but those that did are going out into the world inspired to make a difference. Since Martin's passing, I've spoken to colleagues who've expressed their sadness at his loss, and I've spoken to our students and alumni, some of whom are scattered right across the world. The news of his untimely death at this moment of existential crisis has caused all of us to pause and to reflect. Wherever our alumni are, they've heard of his death from the transdisciplinary community of AEON students they were part of, and with whom they've established lasting friendships and bonds. They tell me how aware they are at this time of how mindfully Martin crafted and held together the AEON family structure that they will always remain part of. So Amy Hawley, a design alumna who now lives in Berlin with a practice that focuses on design as a vehicle for community participation, sent me her thoughts. Martin, she said, as he invited students to call him, was a powerhouse, both in terms of his presence and his deeds. Photography alumnus Nadia van der Walt worked closely with him, first on her master's project, and then as a member of the AEON team working on the Karoo fracking research project, recording scientists, researchers, and local residents. She says, Martin made you feel as if you could accomplish anything, but he never let you forget that you had to put in the work. He was demanding on us just as he was demanding on himself. He expected you to expect a great deal of yourself. At the same time, he let you know that he believed in you in a way that gave you confidence. So you stepped up and you shone. Sculpture student Angel May, who's a current member of the AEON cohort and who's working on myths and storytelling in Africa and producing an animated video highlighting the plight of the lemur in Madagascar, has told me the news of Martin's passing made me extremely sad. I've only known him for a few years, but I saw what a brilliant man he was. In his work, he's left behind a beautiful legacy, and I'm honoured to have been a part of it. Vidon Matthias, who hails from Nigeria, is researching grassroots memorials and determining how memorialization is conducted across Africa. He pays tribute, saying that Prof. Martin opened up new avenues and gave many like myself an opportunity and a platform that we will be eternally grateful for. He will be missed greatly, and my prayers are with his family. And my colleague David Jones has written to me to say how much he valued his friendship with Martin. I loved the way he would magically appear in the studio and sit and chat about progress, ideas, and the work that others were doing. Hierarchy was of no consequence to him, and the students loved his down-to-earth, no-nonsense approach to pretty well everything. I'll end this tribute with a bricolage of thoughts jotted down as people set out to capture their understandings and memories of Martin. Martin was a complex human being. He was much more than the sum of his parts. He was a right brain, left brain amalgam, a magician, a systems thinker, a visionary realist, a fierce warrior with a gentle soul, a mentor and friend, and a demanding supervisor, a teacher scientist whose research agenda was rooted in his lived, subjective, emotionally attuned experience of the world and his empathy with all its peoples. Professor Maarten de Wit was all of those things and more to the colleagues and the students in the Department of Visual Arts and the Faculty of Humanities. If there were more people with this mixture of directness and empathy and passion and drive and intellectual rigor, the world would be a better place. That is what I would like to take away as we celebrate his life, as we acknowledge his stellar scholarly contributions to environmental sense-making, and as we mourn his passing. And I thank you.
Dear Nelson Mandela University community, colleagues, friends, Prof. Maarten de Wit's family, his students, his colleagues, and the geosciences community at large. My name is Azwindini Moronga, the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Science at Nelson Mandela University. We are meeting virtually during these unprecedented times of the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic. On behalf of the science faculty community, I would like to express our heartfelt condolences to Professor Maarten de Wit's family, his students, his colleagues, and the geosciences community around the world. The Faculty of Science will miss him dearly. His character and style of engaging in controversial issues will stay in the minds of many forever. Professor Maarten de Wit was an internationally acclaimed geoscientist who worked on several scientific fields, including the evolution of the early Earth system processes, and lately he was working on transdisciplinary science through Earth Stewardship advocacy. He has occupied various prominent positions at research institutions around the world, including the founding director of the African Earth Observatory Network, AEON, here at Nelson Mandela University. He was one of Africa's most distinguished earth scientists whose contributions to the body of knowledge of earth science has led to the characterization of some of the critical earth processes. In conducting research within communities, he will empower those communities with scientific knowledge for decision-making purposes and for addressing socio-economic challenges affecting those communities. Whereas most of us were still pondering what transdisciplinary approach was, Prof. de Wit was walking it. Prof. de Wit had a talent of identifying and nurturing postgraduate students in need of mentorship and funding for their studies. He helped several students who would have dropped out before completing their studies. He leaves behind a host of several hundred master's and doctoral students he supervised around the world, many still busy with their studies within the science faculty at Mandela University. Many of the students he trained are from rural areas, and today they are occupying various positions in education, in government, and in industrial sectors. Prof. de Wit did not preach the concept of transformation, he walked it. About a week before his passing, Prof. Maarten de Wit and I were exchanging emails about journal articles in Nature on topics ranging from ocean sciences to COVID-19. From the conversations in those emails, he was very much looking forward to a meeting with me. We postponed the meeting last year and had yet to find a suitable time to meet due to our busy schedules. He had wanted us to talk about AEON, ocean sciences, and our new Faculty of Science strategy, amongst other things. From some of the correspondence with Maarten, I think he would have been proud to see our universities and the national government's responses to COVID-19. He would have been proud that our responses to COVID-19 pandemic is based on listening to scientists and understanding of our socio-economic challenges. I know this because of Prof. Maarten de Wit's advocacy of transdisciplinary approach to solving societal challenges. For us to understand Prof. Maarten de Wit, the human side of a scientist, I leave you with the excerpt from a correspondence article published in the journal Nature of 1987, in which Prof. de Wit is one of the co-authors, on a debate about the boycott of South African science. And I quote, open quote, "This country needs to continue to increase its efforts over the next few decades towards training black scientists and technologists, many of whom will be taking up executive positions in internationally competitive concerns, if it is to develop a reasonable living standards for all its people. An across-the-board scientific boycott will seriously hinder this goal, leading to a massive and irreversible brain drain, which is already occurring, and setting this country on a further slide towards greater entropy. At that point, it will be at the mercy of foreign economic exploiters and human rights violators for an untold length of time. Apparent political freedom will then be hollow indeed. Closed quotes from Nature Volume 330, 24 to 31 December 1987. May his soul rest in eternal peace. I thank you.
Right now in the Caribbean and Mexico, many people are not as lucky as we are sitting here around here and feeling great about things. But it's all about this power, and this power is almost unpredictable. You'll see the volcanoes over here. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and of course the earthquakes that come out of these volcanoes around Indonesia, and of course set off these tsunamis that come across the Indian Ocean. And we need to take care of that. We need to think more about that. What do the scientists really, can they tell us when it's going to happen? Well, it's almost impossible to do that right now, certainly without good science. And of course there are consequences as these tsunamis come across in terms of the money that is on the left bottom there.
Maarten and I share a common starting point in South Africa, the Bernard Price Institute for Geophysical Research at Wits University, where I first met him briefly in late 1989, while he was leaving the Institute for the University of Cape Town to take up the position of head of Department of Geological Sciences. Later in 1993, Maarten asked me to come and give a lecture on marine geophysics to his BSc honors class. This was followed by a call in 1994 to join the department at UCT. And that was the beginning of a professional companionship with Maarten that ended unexpectedly 2 weeks ago. In the course of his multiple research projects and science management, Maarten collaborated widely, both nationally and internationally. And the list is too long to go through here, but I will name a few. Nationally, there is Lou Ashworth at Wits University, whom he first met at the NASA research laboratory while in the USA, and convinced him to come to South Africa in the 80s. There is also Rod Green, an eminent South African seismologist, then at the Bernard Price Institute, whom he recently visited just before the lockdown. Andy Duncan, the first geochemist in Africa to analyze rock samples from the moon. His brother, Mike David, with whom Maarten worked closely on the geology and mineral resources of Africa. Internationally, one person was special to Maarten, and that is the late Sam Bowring, a pioneering geologist and expert in geochronology at MIT. Another expert geochronologist who was close to Maarten is Richard Armstrong in Australia, originally from South Africa. The founding director of the GFZ Potsdam in Germany and leader of the International Continental Drilling Program, Rolf Emmermann, through whose collaboration Maarten became the only South African representative of the ICDP science program for many years. Then Brian Horsfield, also at the GFZ in Germany, a leading expert in organic geochemistry, and hydrocarbon, with whom Maarten started work on shale gas in South Africa, long before the shale gas debate. Colin Reeves, a geophysicist based in Holland, who measured and compiled the first gravity map of Botswana. Chris Cotiz, then at Texas University. Trond Torsvik, an eminent paleomagnetician and leader of the Center for Earth Evolution and Dynamics in Oslo. Harold Fumes of the University of Bergen, with whom Maarten had been working until his passing on early life on Earth, and many others across South Africa, Africa, and the world. Maarten was convinced that to understand how the planet on which we live works, and for the benefit of all, and particularly Africa, we need to bring together all disciplines of science, including social sciences. This thinking and the idea that scientific data on Africa must be published from Africa led him in 1999 to bring together a group of scientists in South Africa around the themes of Earth System Science, Earth Stewardship Science, and Transdisciplinary Science. This is how the Africa Earth Observatory Network, or AEON, was founded. Observation, and particularly in the field, has been a critical part of Maarten's scientific work. And this extended to the need for precise dating of rocks and other geobiomaterials. As he used to say with some barring, no dates, no rates, referring to change in natural processes. This motivated Maarten to set up an analytical facility dedicated to precise dating as part of AEON. Maarten was also pushing for the setting up of a paleomagnetic laboratory to better piece together the puzzle of the movement of continents and a better fit for Gondwana. Many would know that the first map of Gondwana that brought together the age of rocks, marine magnetic anomalies, and geochemistry was put together by Maarten in 1988. A decade later, the step was to bring the fauna and flora into the reconstruction of Gondwana. And that was the beginning of a new collaboration with John Anderson, then at the South African Biodiversity Institute. Gondwana Alive initiative was born. But realizing the task was too big and the need to focus on the mother continent, Maarten and John came up with the Africa Alive Corridors initiative, which was endorsed by Nelson Mandela in 1999. The ambitious plan by Maarten and John is to produce 21 books on the Africa Alive Corridors. That is one book for each of the 20 corridors and one for out of Africa. John will now carry that baton together with others in AEON. The Africa Alive Corridors became an umbrella program for AEON in 2009, when I took over the operations of the Institute after some years at De Beers. 2 PhD students are currently enrolled at the Nelson Mandela University and working on the Africa Alive Corridors, one in geology and one in business management. Maarten's focus on Africa and its youth led to AEON's involvement with the International Year of Planet Earth, a joint initiative by the International Union of Geological Sciences and UNESCO, but also the UNESCO Geoscience Education Initiative in Africa. Capacity building and outreach was central to AEON, and this was particularly led by the late Marian Tredu, a special friend, founding member of AEON, and a South African expert in the geochemistry of platinum group elements, and whose name was given to a mineral recently found in Barberton by the International Mineralogical Association. Maarten's pioneering and innovative thinking then brought together Earth Stewardship Science and capacity building to set up a citizen science initiative as part of a benefit to society of a Karushel gas baseline research project. The citizen science program formed the basis of a PhD recently completed at Nelson Mandela University. While bringing together the different disciplines into Earth Stewardship Science, Maarten was uncompromising in his quest for top science and quantitative analysis of data. For that reason, he maintained that all students, including from humanities, must learn statistics. This has been largely enabled through another founding member of AEON, Christine Thiart, a South African and international expert in spatial statistics, who Maarten convinced to leave her conventional statistic back in 1997 to quantify the distribution of metal minerals in Gondwana. This led to a paper entitled Scent of a Supercontinent. I mention this because Maarten has a unique way to weave hard science with everyday life words. And he was insistent on naming his project using African words, such as Inkabaye Africa, Ikure, and Ipakari. Maarten was continuously on a quest for the next big idea and would often walk into my office with an idea and say, "We need to do this." And often I would look at him and say, "Can I think about it?" His way was to bring the ideal into the real world, and that was challenging. He had incredible creative and work energy, most of the time working on 3 to 4 articles at the same time while dealing alongside with numerous postgraduate student theses. Maarten left us suddenly, in the same way he walked among us with his distinguished scientist life, on his own terms. I cannot end without saying that Maarten was a scientist giant on whose shoulders I stood. He left behind extra large shoes that cannot be filled, but his legacy will live on. I will miss him. As the AEON colleagues and students, we bid him farewell. Thank you.
Maarten de Wit was probably the most enigmatic researcher, colleague, professor, and really true friend we could ever have met. He was completely selfless in ensuring that his students were given all possible opportunities and training required to resolve complex global challenges, and indeed prepare themselves to become global leaders in their own right. He was always the most imaginative and innovative in his thinking and research ideas, never ever shying away from any challenge or solution that may have seemed just a little bit too crazy. He really understood the principles of geological time, and that the very evidence needed to find solutions to what may seem like an insurmountable global problem could actually be found by simply looking at the rocks beneath your feet, the sky above your head, or really just truly engaging with those around you, especially engaging our forebears, He really stressed the importance of recording their stories and experiences and emotions for generations ahead. These ideals really echoed the principle of Charles Lyell, who said that the past is the key to the present and the present is the key to the future. Therein, Maarten knew that his students and the critical research being done in this very moment could change the future as we know it. Maarten also knew that complex problems like these could only be solved through multiple disciplines, operating together and evolving together through unique transdisciplinary themes. This was really the basis of his famed Africa Earth Observatory Network and the numerous global programs and partners that brought an immense number of researchers and students of all shapes, forms, and sizes and backgrounds together. This really formed a delicately woven web of researchers, all using the same natural laboratory around them to design policy influencing research objectives. In fact, many of the results of this type of research are now being used in the world. For example, we see applications of his baseline investigations in the Crew of South Africa. There's exploration for new renewable energy sources like geothermal energy. Possible environmental remediation methodologies are being developed. There's implementation of citizen science in South Africa. And of course, the very inner workings of the Earth and its most secret processes have been uncovered by Maarten. Maarten's own journey really started in 1972 when he finished his PhD at Cambridge University. Thereafter, he joined Columbia University in New York and spent much of his time navigating through Tierra del Fuego and the Antarctic Peninsula. Besides this wondrous natural laboratory he was navigating, he also spent a lot of the time surrounded by real-world societal issues and conflict. For example, while in Chile, he witnessed civil war and human strife like he had never seen before. Literally dodging bullets, he had to reconsider his science and his existence and the solutions that he really needed to find. He had to take some time to reflect and thereafter joined the African Union in Ethiopia, really trying to give back. Once again, he witnessed starvation and the plight of the most vulnerable people in Africa. This really touched him, and it reminded him that science and society cannot be treated separately. It also really made him think about the Earth's inner working systems, Earth system processes, and considerations of the true cost of the Earth working to develop the natural resources that we as humans often take for granted. As students, he would often challenge us to try and calculate the cost of the Earth, what it would assign to a natural resource it had been developing over billions of years, and the associated externality costs of us not truly valuing these resources or providing it the proper sustainability. With an interest in the formation and evolution of the Earth to this degree, he came to South Africa to look for the oldest rocks on the planet and really tried to piece together how the world and life itself evolved. He did this hoping to find the key to truly integrated global solutions. Here he knew that the solutions would be sought very much incrementally, with education and developing the next generations being pertinent to global sustainability. Maarten poured his heart and soul into his students. Within each student, he had this innate ability to ignite a flame of passion and inspiration. He would teach us to not fear great problems, but to always think about it and search for the answers. As slow and as methodically as it would take, he would advise us to do this. While he held our hands through most of this journey, he had complete faith in his students that we would evolve ourselves and always resolve any challenge that we may be facing. So now, true to the context of plate tectonics and continental recycling, Maarten really started his earth science career investigating Neoproterozoic and Paleozoic aged rocks in North America, the other side of Rodinia and Gondwana for us. Then decades later and numerous experiences later, the supercontinental cycle found him investigating the same aged rocks around the southern coast of South Africa, with now shared experience and invaluable lessons for all of us. So now we have to bid farewell to Maarten. Maarten, we salute you and we thank you, and we especially thank his family, Lynn, Thandi, Char. Thank you for sharing this great man with us. We will ensure that his legacy and vision stays alive within all of us. Thank you.
My name is Takan Ntodi, and I am a former student of Maarten de Wit. I recently graduated, so he was now referring to me as a colleague. Yes, so today I'll be sharing with you my experience of Maarten as a supervisor, but not only on the scientific side, but the human touch as well. It is a difficult task to condense all memories and experiences into such a small amount of time. However, we do what we can. I will also not just be speaking for myself, I'll be speaking on behalf of Maarten students that are across the world, the ones that he worked with in his earlier years and the ones that he was currently working with now, because I think there is a golden thread that runs through all of us that keeps us together, and it is the lessons that he had instilled in all of us, and most of them not through teaching with words, but really through demonstration and I guess walking the walk. So the first thing that I really want to highlight is that Maarten believed that everybody had potential. All he wanted from you was dedication, and you got it. It did not matter what your background was, it did not matter what your circumstances are. If he believed that you were passionate enough to do what you said you wanted to do, he stood up for you, he fought for you. He fought for students that had not such a bright background. He's fought for students that did not have financial means. He fought for students that were refugees in this country, and he fought for a great variety of students. And you can see this in the book that we're compiling for him. It's a book that has letters from different students from across the world with pictures, and it was a book that intended to tell him how grateful we are for everything that he had done and what we had learned from him. So that book will be published on the AEON website and the AEON Facebook page. But yes, as I was saying, he fought for anybody that wanted to pursue their career in science, that wanted to pursue a career in solving world challenges. And this is not just in geology, because he opened the doors to students from different backgrounds, whether you're a sociology student, whether you were a videographer, whether you were a media student, or a scientist that is not a geologist or a chemist, botanist. He believed that we could all work together and we could all contribute towards solving the challenges of this world, and that there is a place for every one of us at the table. The one thing he's always instilled in us is that we can learn from each other, we can grow with each other, and when we supported each other, we better understood what the bigger purpose is, and we realized just how linked and related we are in this world. The other thing that I would really like to highlight that we learned from Maarten is the value of learning and the value of teaching. He always encouraged all his students to transfer knowledge to those that come after us, not only because it helped them, but because it also helped you better understand the value of what you were pursuing. He always sent us to different researchers across the world, and he would spare no expense to ensure that you had exposure to the best scientists, to the best instruments, to the best methodologies, so that you can be the best version of a scientist that you are meant to be. And he would always tell us to learn as much as possible. He would tell us that he does not know everything, and we can only grow by learning from various people. The last thing that I would like to highlight in this time is his generosity as a person. He was generous with his time, he was generous with his finances, he was generous even with his space. Bless his family. There would be times when some of the students would have nowhere to stay, and Maarten would bring them into their home, and they were so welcoming and supportive, and it is a value that you do not find in all mentors, in all supervisors, and it was just it was a heartwarming place. There are multiple stories of his goodness, multiple stories of his kindness, and multiple stories of the lessons, the laughs, the field trips, the crazy stories of when he was pursuing science himself that he has shared with us, that I would love to sit and share with you, but I don't think there is enough time to encapsulate everything of such a great man. As his students, we've already discussed that trying to fill his shoes is impossible, so we're not going to try and do that. But because he lives in every one of us, what we are going to do is try and work together so that we can keep his legacy alive while we pursue our own paths. If there is anything you could ever take away from Maarten de Wit as a person, is that there is value in every individual. We will miss him greatly, we love him greatly, and the only promise we can make is that we will do our best to uphold a legacy, a beautiful legacy that he has left behind.
What a great privilege it is, and what an honor it is to speak about my friend of 25 years, Maarten de Wit, who passed away last week. I want to say 5 things about him, but I want to say something first. It's a pity that we are not all together in a single auditorium or a room, because I would have hoped in that auditorium and room that there would have been a lot of dancing and singing and ululating. Because Maarten was a man who loved life in real, expressive ways. He would have been joyous of the fact that we were celebrating his life with laughter, with joy, with singing. And celebration is the right word to use, because although we come to these occasions always looking somber and sad, this is an occasion where we can celebrate the life of a man, a life well lived, a life well lived in the service of scholarship and in the service of mankind and in the service of emancipation. So I want to see this as a celebration rather than as an opportunity to be mourning. We're mourning, of course, but we're mostly celebrating. So the 5 things I want to talk about are Maarten as a friend, Maarten as a scholar, Maarten as an activist. I want to talk a little bit about his contribution to scholarship generally and to the fields of scholarship that we know, and I want to give thanks. Maarten was an extraordinary friend. I was telling someone the other night that we met at a very raucous and drunken party in a house in West Street, Sandton, 42 years ago, this spring. We had all been sharing this house, and I had moved out, and Maarten had moved in while I was away in the UK working on my thesis. We hit it off immediately, and we became close friends for a long, long time. We were together in Cape Town together when he was at UCT, and I was at UWC. And most of our conversations, when we were not partying, as we did in the early years, were opportunities for deep, deep discussion about life, about scholarship, about the meaning of life, and about particularly what it was to be human. I want to remember especially one really interesting night we had in Amsterdam, the 2 of us walking around Amsterdam. He'd spent part of his childhood in Amsterdam and part of his late adulthood there too. Before he came to South Africa, he had been living in Amsterdam. And it was a real joy to be with him in Amsterdam, the city of his parents, where he talked a lot about being Dutch in the world, and his complications about this really interesting, rich Dutch-Irish background that he had. Secondly, Maarten is a scholar. This is an extraordinary body of work that he's left us. It is not only in science, particularly in geology, where he was a scholar of world-class standing, who made major contributions at an enormously young age, I must add, to fields of structural geology. His work in the Barberton Mountains on the earliest forms of life is regarded as pioneering and world-breaking, as was his long work when he was at the Bernard Price Institute at Wits on Gondwana land in Africa, and as more recently has been the work that he's done on the Cape Fold Belt. He was not a regular geologist, but he was always an entertaining and challenging geologist. He brought to geology a sense of humor, a sense of the absurd, and a sense of deep searching. In my view, he never really ever left geology. It remained the anchor of his work and the anchor of everything he did subsequently. His activist life, which I'm going to talk about in a second, his activist life was rooted in the scientific importance of geology. And he did two things which I think made him so interesting as a geologist. Firstly, he continued to theorize about the nature of man in society and called upon people to think in deep time, what the geologists call deep time. That's to think in millennia rather than simply in short bursts of history. History to him was yesterday. Millennia is where the really important things happened in life, and where how man began to react to the planet was really around millennia. So Maarten, as a scholar, made an enormous contribution. Part of this contribution he made was also that he read deeply, not only in geology and in science, but he read deeply beyond science, into local stories, into novels, and constantly in different areas of scholarship and knowing. And the great thing that he was able to do was bring together the gaps between different forms of knowledge. And I think that was where he arises as an activist. He was not an activist in the South African sense of being an activist. It was difficult for him to become an activist in that sense because he was not a citizen of the country. But Maarten was an activist in another, much more global sense of being an activist. He was an activist for human rights. He was an activist for the planet and an activist at a planetary scale. I think that all his work was around the necessity for us to be concerned about the issues facing us on the planet. I think it's a great loss for us that we've not been able to hear Maarten think and talk about the events around COVID-19, because he was so interested and so committed and so thoughtful and so imaginary about the whole issue around interconnections between people at a planetary scale. And that's the level of his activism. I think his scholarship, particularly in geology, was drawn into his activism about the planet. But if the planet was one optic in which he lived and understood the world, another was a very small micro scale. He understood the world in terms of critical zones. And I think it's important to look at the work that he did in the Karoo in the latter part of his life, where he was looking at the Karoo as an ecological planetary whole, where he could look at the Karoo and think about the Karoo as a single unit of people living together. And that took him, as we all know, in the direction of activism around Khoi identity and Khoi understandings of the world. So I think Maarten is an activist of a different level and a different way that we understand activism in South Africa. But activist he was in a planetary scale. Just one point about his activism on the South African level. He was very innovative at UCT for bringing black students into the science department at UCT. And I think that people who remember that time will think that Maarten was a pioneer at that particular opportunity. Maarten's contribution on all these levels has been enormous. And this was recognized in many places and by many people. But Maarten was always modest about these garlands and these honors people wanted to give him. in a certain amount of humility, humbleness, and understanding that this was a life of service, not a life to be honored in the orthodox way. He made an enormous contribution. He made a contribution in science, in activism, in scholarship, in friendship. And so his contribution as a total human being is extraordinary. And that's why at the beginning of these remarks, I talked about giving thanks, celebrating this life, rather than simply mourning the passing of a great man. As I conclude, I want to say one or two words of thanks. I want to give thanks and pay tribute to his parents, who I never knew, nor did I know his two brothers. I think this must have been an extraordinary family living between the Netherlands and Ireland to have raised such an interesting and dedicated and committed son. So as we talk today and think about these things, I want to remember his parents too. But I also want to give a huge thanks, a thank you for sharing him with the rest of us, for allowing the rest of us to feed off him intellectually and spiritually. I want to give thanks to his partner of 40 years, Lynn Ferguson, and his two children, Thandi and Chart. May he rest in peace.
Good afternoon. As Martin's immediate family, we wish to thank the Nelson Mandela University for arranging this memorial as a platform to celebrate his life and to share the grief of his departure. For those whom we have not met, Martin's immediate family consists of myself, Lynn, or Fergs, as he called me, Thandi Maya Gondwana, our daughter, Chart Cornelius, our son, as well as Matt and Amy, our son and daughter-in-law, and lastly Emma Tembi, our beloved first granddaughter who joined the family 8 months ago. We are overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and support that we've received from around the globe. The many tributes received by those whose lives he's touched have made us keenly aware that he was loved not only by us and his extended family, but also by his other family, namely his students and colleagues. At home, Martin was most often found working at his desk, and I use the word work hesitantly, as he did not regard it as doing work. It was his passionate life calling. Martin, beyond doubt, accomplished so much in his life. However, he still had innumerable plans and dreams. And as we hear of his many current projects, we're saddened that he cannot complete them and hope that in his memory, those unfinished tasks will be completed.
Never did I imagine that we, as the immediate family, would be reminiscing about Dad and compiling this WhatsApp video tribute. Myself, Lynn, Matt in South Africa, and Chart and Amy in Tasmania. However, we really feel that Dad would be smiling down on us now, watching us as this family tackle this project, just like we tackled the many world or science questions he posed. Dad was really the same at home as he appears to have been at work. At home, he was happiest, sitting around a table, surrounded by his family and friends. These occasions were always lively and robust. We were personally challenged, encouraged to think critically, to question, and finally cajoled into action. He loved to share his knowledge and interests of the sciences, as well as the social challenges facing Africa, particularly South Africa. From his vast rock collection at the table, he would often select a few choice specimens used to quiz colleagues or students, or to weave stories around the rock samples for us non-scientists. He did love a good argument, and frequently family dinners might end might erupt into lively debates about the state of the world and our place in it. He always made you think, made you question, made you ask why, really to better understand things. Our friends were always cautious when asking a question because it generally resulted in an hour-long inspirational lecture. He always encouraged one to find one's own voice, support one in the fight, but ultimately let you achieve your own goals and win your own battles. His manner was sometimes aggressive and loud, especially when he believed he was correct. This blew over quickly as it would arise, and he would soon be whistling, a clear message of a happy mood. He was stubborn and eccentric, but an eternal optimist. His recent garden project in Plett was testament to his determination to tackle this project without any help and create this wild natural haven from a blank canvas.
Life with Maarten, the partner, was one full of adventures that were used as a means to grow. Each sabbatical was carefully planned to enable him to work with different and exciting scientists, whilst for us, by broadening our horizon, it was an opportunity to learn and grow. Win-win for himself and the family. My first experience of this was in 1982 when Maarten arranged a sabbatical in Kingston, Ontario. Believing that the best way to experience Canada was via its pioneering spirit, we spent a year in a remote wooden cabin that was without running water and had a long drop toilet down the path. I was given a bicycle so that I could cycle the 10 miles to shower in the nearest gym. During the year we travelled in a van from east to west Canada to the south of the USA, exploring and learning. The adventures continued with the arrival of Tundi and Chart, and we as a family fondly remember the camping trip with the de Wits in Zimbabwe and Lesotho, our years in Boston, Berlin, Paris and Holland, travelling round Europe, and our last outing when we hiked the Whale Trail. It was always an education, never conventional, often challenging, but definitely an adventure. Maarten gave us all wings and encouraged us fervently to fly independently.
Dad was forever curious, and learning was a passion for him. Never selfish with his vast knowledge, he loved to share it, especially the stories that rocks told us about the Earth's history. His love of the outdoors was infectious, and he used any occasion to teach. Family holidays always had a geological twist, from hiking to the top of Mount Vesuvius here, to forever stopping at the side of the road and getting out his geological hammer to collect rock samples. We seldom took a direct route from A to B. Usually the longer, more scenic route that included the chance to explore and discover new things was preferred. From a young age, Tundi and I used to have science lessons with him. And we can still recite the rhyme we came up with to remember the first 20 elements of the periodic table.
Healy, BB, C-No, F, Nina, Magel, Sips, Clarka.
Dad was the eternal optimist, zealous and courageous, a strong advocate for this planet and for his students. A lovely memory was shared with us recently, how previous students snuck into the back row of the class just to hear Dad lecture again. He had the ability to make rocks come alive. I fondly remember Dad visiting Amy and I in Tasmania. We took him to the Museum of New and Old Art, and he was blown away by the sandstone entrance hall. The museum is built underground, exposing a sandstone face as one walks in. He was so enthralled by this rock face that he asked me to go buy us beers at the bar because we were going to be there a while. He lectured us on the different layers and possible extinction events they represented. His passion infectious. Soon we were surrounded by a crowd of tourists listening to Dad. We were there for an hour and we hadn't even entered the museum yet. Everyone who met Dad was struck by this passion, and he was remembered for making real and significant changes in his wholly unique field of Earth stewardship. Dad was endlessly curious. His bedside table always had several half-read books from a variety of different genres, each with important sections or sentences carefully highlighted. He had an incredible ability to multitask with work, sadly not with many other things, as he was often busy with hundreds of different projects simultaneously. His offices can only be described as organized chaos, with piles of maps and papers all over the place. Only he understood the filing system. We always knew when Dad is in a good mood. He'd be whistling loudly.
Beneath a sometimes gruff and rough exterior, he was really a softie, empathetic, generous, and one who had the very best intentions. No matter who you are, without fanfare, he always wanted to help with his time and his resources. He was so concerned about his students that the day before lockdown, he drove back to PE to make sure that they had the means to survive this time. We remember clearly once in Cape Town in our home, a burglar entered our house and made off with Dad's beloved camera. Giving chase, Dad managed to catch the perpetrator and retrieve the stolen camera, and upon questioning, the man revealed that he stole because he was hungry. To the security guard's disbelief, before they were permitted to escort the burglar out of the neighborhood, Dad insisted on supplying him with several freshly made peanut butter sandwiches. A gift from Dad was never something hastily selected. It was always something he deeply considered and usually chose to teach, to challenge, inspire, and hopefully galvanize into action, and really to just bring joy. An ardent bibliophile, many would have received a thoughtfully inscribed book as a present from Dad. No doubt, many of those books rest next to our beds, waiting probably be read or reread. He deeply considered each and every undertaking. Even the naming of us kids did not escape his deep consideration. Our names were not selected from a list of girls' and boys' names. Upon arrival in South Africa, he read the book The Covenant by James Michener. While saddened and angered by the fictional tale that wove generations of fictional characters with factual events, he was inspired to name us after the two main characters, myself, Thandi, representing Africa, and my brother, Chart, representing the Netherlands.
Dad was extremely humble and never one to trumpet his own horn nor seek the limelight. He always deflected any acknowledgements. Having read numerous tributes, we are sadly only now aware of the true extent of his achievements.
You've been described by several as a giant, and you truly are. May your spirit live on in all of us as we strive to continue your legacy. You have made an indelible impact on our lives, equipped us with a vast number of necessary life skills, taught us to continually strive to better ourselves and the world, and loved us unconditionally. Has changed drastically and suddenly. Dad, this hole you've left in our lives is huge, and right now has us feeling empty, lost, and alone. But we will keep walking forward as you would want us to do. We know you are with us every step of that journey and are comforted by so many memories which we hold close to our hearts. Someone once wrote, when someone you love becomes a memory, that memory becomes a treasure.
Although born in Holland, Africa was his spiritual home. We will miss you. Hamba Gatli, Iliwa Letu. Farewell, you are our rock.
In 2016, Edward Wilson is a very famous biologist, and he already decided if we want to preserve nature as it is now, already in the sixth extinction, we have to divide the world up in half. We have to share the half of the world with nature, and I'm talking here about the animals and the plants and the ecosystems. If we don't do that, we're going to be going into that sixth extinction, and that's a hell of a challenge, coming from a very well-renowned world. So we call that half Earth. It's an interesting concept. Next.
We are deeply saddened. The world has lost a giant. Africa has lost a pioneer and an earth scientist. We have lost a father, a mentor, and a humanitarian. Maarten de Wit was a driven man, a passionate scientist, as the testimonies presented here have shown. One of our own most distinguished earth scientists, whose research interests spanned geodynamics, tectonics, and stratigraphy, early earth processes, and the evolution of the Gondwana supercontinent. He was an ambassador for the African continent in all his activities. His passion and tenacity in the promotion of the Africa Alive Corridors program has been described as both inspirational and encompassing. It embraced science, culture, landscape in a positive, educational, and Pan-African approach. A Philipson Stowe Professor of Mineralogy and Geology at the University of Cape Town in the late 1980s, founder and first director of the Center for Interactive Graphical Computing of Earth Systems at the University of Cape Town, director, Africa Earth Observatory Network, AEON, and chair of Earth Stewardship at our own university, Nelson Mandela University. A giant has indeed fallen. I wish to thank Maarten's students and mentees for the opportunity they have given to Maarten to be part of his life in order to bring out the best of Maarten's endeavors and dreams and realization of the transformation of the research cohort in Africa and South Africa. I thank them for the spirit in which they are honoring Maarten through many of the initiatives they have embarked on, as we learn on social media and from our university. I would also like to send a word of sincere appreciation to our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Sibongile Mutwa. Thank you for honoring the life of Maarten, for creating a platform for recognizing and for us to pay tribute in a way that we could during this lockdown period. To colleagues, the scientific community and friends, Maarten has left a legacy that is never to be forgotten. He has played his part with a remarkable spirit, excellence, and dedication, judged by his many accolades, outputs, and impact, not only on his students, but on communities where he was engaged. To his family, thank you for allowing Maarten to share his life with us and for the support that you provided him. We are not even close to imagining the pain and suffering of losing a loved one. Please accept our heartfelt sympathies for your loss as we extend a hearty word of comfort. May the peace that comes from the memories of your love comfort you now and in the days ahead. We share your grief in this time with deep sympathy and condolences. We acknowledge the depth of the wound, and we remain steadfast in prayer for the healing of your hearts as you mourn the passing of Maarten. May his soul rest in peace.